Hi, and welcome to the Intuitive Insights podcast series. I'm Nina Lockwood, the founder and chief exec of Intuitive Talent Solutions. We work with leading transport organisations in the UK and bring them together with a diverse and talented candidate network for interim and permanent roles. The people who know me know that I like to immerse myself in good conversation. And over the course of the podcast series, I will be joined by some exceptionally talented leaders from the UK transport sector to talk about their careers, the industry, leadership, challenges and opportunities, and much more besides. I do hope that you'll join me and that you'll be inspired by my fabulous guests and their intuitive insights. I'm delighted to welcome Vinay Palmer, founder and chief everything officer for Dhruva Star. We talk culture, customer, curiosity, leadership, and the importance of having your own North Star. I do hope you enjoy this conversation. I absolutely loved it. Vinay Palmer, a very, very warm welcome to the Intuitive Insights podcast. It's a delight to have you here.
Oh, the delight is all mine, Nina. Thank you very much for having me.
It's taken us a while to get to this point, hasn't it? But I'm a firm believer in everything happens at exactly the time it's supposed to happen.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
I know that you're going to share some really interesting stuff today with our Intuitive Insights audience. So I'm delighted that you're here. So as founder and chief everything officer, which I think is the most brilliant title that you've just given me there, founder and chief everything officer of Dhruva Star. Vinny, we've known each other for quite some time now, and I think you are an absolutely brilliant example of somebody who has a passion about a subject, which more of which we will come on to, of course, but has been able to take that passion from different industry sectors and bring it into the transport industry, latterly, kind of most recently, and be able to work your magic with those transferable skills and bring that transferable knowledge into different industry sectors. So I think you are the poster person for that, quite honestly. I think you're a brilliant example. So without further ado, and less wittering from me, I'm going to hand over to you, and I'm going to ask you in traditional Intuitive Insights style to start us off, please, with your career story. Where did you come from? Where have you been? And what you're doing now?
Gosh, three big questions. So where did I come from? So I'm a first generation immigrant. My father was an immigrant to this country in 1976 from another British colony, which was Kenya. I was born here. We had a family business back. My father set up a supermarket in the 70s, and it was one of the first in Birmingham to import pickles and spices directly from India.
Oh, wow.
And when families came over from the British colonies in India and places like that here, they would settle in communities close to each other. And so my dad's shop was like a hub of the community. So all of our customers were, people that we knew, friendships that we'd built, people in the community, but he had this real loyal customer base. And I look back on it now and I can see that there was a relationship building and all of that stuff. But as a kid, I was just in awe of all these people coming in, the same faces and all that kind of stuff. So I was exposed, I guess, to customer experience in some sense back then, but I just grew up in the family business. And then obviously I went to school. I left school with really bad results, not because I wasn't bright. I just played way too much cricket and didn't revise, thought I could skate through and was wrong. So I had to retake my GCSEs. And while I was doing that, I kind of had this moment of, I don't really know what I want to do next. All my friends had done that and were now in their second years of A levels. They were going off to do university. And I was like, I don't really know what I want to do. I want to do something more creative. I had a passion for art. But when you're from an Indian family and you say to your parents, I want to be an artist, they look at you and go, where's the money in that? Why don't you be an artist or accountant, one of those things? No, my parents were great. They were really liberal. I never got forced down any particular career path. But trying to explain to my mom I wanted to do an art diploma was an interesting conversation. So I kind of wanted to be a graphic designer, and specifically an advertising artist, creating billboards with slogans and advertising. And there's a kind of connection to what happens later in my career to that. What was really going on there was, I think it was creativity and expression of communication and connecting with people. I think that was really what was in the undercurrent. So I started a diploma. I finished my first year diploma. So I got the first diploma. Then I started a second course, and about halfway through, all this was all supposed to be this was all supposed to be about graphic design, and it was just we were just drawing naked old men and life drawing, and it was just something it didn't really appeal to me. Naked old men, naked old women drawing balls. It just wasn't the thing that I wanted to do. So I kind of at that time I was already working part-time. I was working in McDonald's. I'd also done a stint at Tesco's on the front line on the checkouts and stuff. So I had a lot of customer service experience. And you know how often in a story there's a hero, you know, the typical hero's journey, there's a calling and there's a guide that appears. So I've got an aunt. She's not an aunt by blood. She's an aunt by relationship.
Right.
She's a really good friend of my mum and dad's, and she got me a job in a bank, a contact center. It was a part-time job to start with, that then turned into full-time. But it was on the phones, and it was taking credit applications. So it was in the old days when you'd go into a furniture store and you'd buy stuff on instant credit, or you'd buy stuff on 3 years credit, or whatever those kind of things, or a television, or
Yeah.
whatever those things were. I was the voice on the other end of the phone talking to the shop owner to approve
Right.
your credit. So I did that for a while. I went full time because I loved working with people. I found this place that I thought, well, okay, I'll do this for a while, save some money. I can always go back to education later. It never happened. I just loved working there. So I just worked my way through the ranks. I went from agent to supervisor to team leader. Um, but in that space, there was this kind of sense of curiosity that kind of came over me. And my mum, when she was alive, would say this to me, and my dad kind of says to me, he said, "You're one of these kids that just could never sit still. You always wanted to kind of be nosy and go and figure stuff out." So I had this whole drive to kind of want to see the bigger picture. I figured that if I only did this slice of the jigsaw, and if I didn't understand the other parts, I couldn't contribute fully. But if I understand the whole system, then I understand what my role is in it, and then I can do my job better and understand the impacts elsewhere. So I just went around and started talking to other people in different departments. I started to understand how fraud worked, how underwriting worked, how business development worked, how marketing worked, and I ended up getting opportunities in there. So I ended up creating almost my own mini graduate scheme, even though I wasn't a graduate.
Yeah.
So I spent 4 years at that bank. They also launched the GM card, Marbles card, Goldfish card. You'll know some of these brands.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that same aunt said, "Right, you've reached a ceiling here. We need to find you somewhere else to go." And she gave me an application form for a bank called Prudential Banking.
Mm.
Now I took this application form and just put it on my bedside table, and it ended up in the bin, really. And then she
Right.
followed up a couple of weeks later and said, "Have you filled that form in?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm really." She said, "Right, sit down here now, fill it in, and I'm not going until you fill it in, and I'm going to post it for you." So she posted it. A few weeks later, I got an invitation to an interview for a mortgage underwriter. I went to this interview. It was about an hour and 20 minutes. And bearing in mind, I'm only going for a low-level mortgage advisor role, but I
Yeah.
spent an hour and 20 minutes with a HR director or manager at that time, a lady called Jeanette Granger. And we had the most amazing conversation, very little to do with technical ability and more to do with life, attitude, how you saw the world,
Ooh.
that.
Right.
Um, and I got the job magically. I got this job. I was over the moon. So I ended up being, I think, employee number 50 or 60 in Prudential Banking, because it was a new
Right.
bank that Prudential was setting up.
Yeah.
Um, it was the first new bank for 100 years. It was still in a pilot phase. We still hadn't had our license from the Bank of England, so we were still in that kind of piloting phase. And yeah, so joined the organization, mortgage underwriter, and again, same thing happened. I got to a point where I did the role for a while. I was like, "I'm bored. I want to do more. I know I can do more." So I went and spoke to my boss, Jerry Tower, at the time, and said, "Jerry, I'm bored. Is there anything else I can do?" And in that early days of Prudential Banking, because it was a new bank, it had a really strict lending criteria, so we couldn't
Mm.
do 100% mortgages or buy-to-lets. But we were selling mortgages through the direct sales force that we had out in the market. The good old days of insurance
I
guys out,
remember it well. Yeah.
going back to the 90s here.
Yeah.
And they were instructed to put all of their mortgage business through the bank. Now, a lot of these guys had relationships with their local bank manager, Cheltenham and Gloucester, Lloyds Bank, Bradford and Bingley, throwing out names here that don't exist.
Yeah. I remember
Um,
them all though. Yeah.
yeah. And they were really annoyed because they didn't want to do that, because we kept declining what was to them perfectly good business. So I ended up setting up an internal mortgage broking service. So I went out with the help of a financial advisor and another senior project manager. But there's me, 20 something, never done this before in my life. He's gone, do you fancy doing this project? I went, all right then. So I jumped in with both feet and I found all the panel lenders. So I went to Bank of Scotland, Bank of Ireland, Capital Home Loans, Birmingham Midshires, Kensington Finance, Mortgage Express. Went to go and see them all, sold them the idea. They all came on board. I created a panel, recruited the team, set up the process, and
Wow.
set up this internal broker service that meant that if our direct sales force wanted to do a buy to let 100% of adverse credit lending, we could do it for them and set up this thing. And then through that, I went out and did loads of road shows to the different branches and stuff. And so I really kind of started to build my confidence around presenting, confidence around building relationships, understanding customer experience, even though it was internal customer experience at that time as well. So I did that, did a stint in marketing, did the same sort of thing. And then I probably had the big thing in my life that shifted everything from there on in. Up until that point, I was bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, following the script. Everything goes this way. And then in the year 2000, I got married. I met my wife in 99, and that was a story in itself, which is for another time. But we were getting married in 2000, and in Indian weddings, you don't just pick a date. You go and see a priest, and the priest tells you which is the most auspicious day and all of that. So my mum went to see one priest, and he gave her a date. She didn't like that date, so she went for a second opinion, and then a third opinion, and then a fourth opinion. And then finally, we found a date that worked, and it was supposed to be the most auspicious day. But what happened on that day was, on the morning that I got married, my mom was covered from head to toe in some kind of blotch and rash, and she was unresponsive. We called an ambulance, and they didn't know what it was at the time, so they just took her in for some tests because they just didn't know what was going on. And I carried on to the wedding. My wedding was in Leicester. We lived in Birmingham at the time. So kind of wedding car went that way, and ambulance went that way, and that was the last time I saw her alive because she died on the same day, late that day. So the wedding was done. I came back. Unbeknown to me, most of my family, my brothers and my dad had left, and they were my dad was already at the hospital. My brothers had left. My best friend was waiting for me at the end of the wedding ceremony, pushed me into the car. I need to take you home. We need to go. So he drove me, got to the hospital. She was already brain dead. She was on a life support machine. And my first decision at 25 years old, as a married man, was switching off the life support machine.
Oh my goodness.
And I was still in my wedding gear.
Oh.
My wife was still in her wedding gear. And it was if I look back on my life, that was the transformative shift in my mindset and everything that I do now. So it really rocked my world and changed the world to, there is no script. Life is too short, and all of those kind of cliched things that come through, but really through that experience was the beginning of the Shape Foundations. That sent me down a path of really investing in understanding the world, people. So I took a real interest in, why do people do what they do? I really went internal as well about driving, where do emotions come from? Why do we feel this way? Like searching for meaning. So I studied neuro-linguistic programming. I studied coaching. I read probably every self-help book that I could get my hands on. I listened to Tony Robbins relentlessly in the car, and Jim Rohn, Zig Ziglar, which we'll talk about later on. And then I found myself a little bit lost career-wise. I went back so by that time, Prudential Banking had become Egg. I'd left in 2000 because I wanted a fresh start with all of this going on. I took a role at Britannic Assurance to set up a full advice and recommendation advice service over the phone, which didn't quite work out. They stopped the project. I got made redundant. And then I dotted around a few roles, with outsourcers and stuff. And then I found my way back to Egg, because when I left in 2000, everywhere else I went, I felt like a square peg in a round hole. And you were exposed to the Egg culture, and you know what I'm talking about here. It was the place where, in today's world, we talk about employee experience and the importance of putting the employees first. In 1998, we were doing that in spades. That was the game. It was customer experience on the outside, but employee experience drives customer experience. It's all about culture, leadership, all of those kind of things. So my career at Egg was really those two 5-year slots put together, was where I really learned all about the real meaning of leadership, driving internal culture, what customer experience is all about, the link between customer experience, advocacy, trust, and that whole term, long-term success. So that's really the mainstay of my career. Then I left in 2006 after Citibank bought the Egg brand. I went off to do some consultancy. So I did a mix of associate work, direct work. For 10 years, I worked in retail, telecoms, automotive, insurance, across a range of industries, doing all sorts of stuff, predominantly around leadership and customer experience. And then my transport story, was like all great stories, starts with an accident. So I was working with a really good friend of mine, Nikki Sawford, who runs a brilliant company called Customer Whisperers, who's also in the customer experience space. And we would jointly did a project with National Express, and I was with her, and I spoke at National Express's conference in 2015, and did a session on customer experience. They loved it. We had a conversation. I went in then to do a 3-month interim assignment to fix a broken contact center. Essentially, they were in manner of trouble, and that 3 months turned into 6 months, and that 6 months then turned into an 8-year career, because I ended up staying, joining their board, became customer experience director for the coach business. Then I became UK customer experience director. Then I took on digital, which was all about setting up agile ways of working, product managers, the kind of the whole digital product development internally. So setting all of that up, and growing that team and establishing that kind of culture in the business of test and learn and MVP and all of that stuff. Wow. I also led the innovation hub. So we had a space where we had companies come on board who would do 12-week stints with us, and trying to solve a problem statement we'd given them, and they co-create and create proof of concepts for us. So I led that for a while. I did a role as an MD for a couple of years in a lovely little business, which was all about special education needs transport and mobility impaired transport. So I ran that business for 2 years. We ran over 200 routes for Birmingham City Council, taking kids with special needs to and from school. It was one of the most humbling experiences of my life, seeing what we were doing and the impact that we were making. And also the mobility Dial-A-Ride type, people that live in London will know Dial-A-Ride from TfL. We had a similar service in Birmingham. And then I came out of that role, went back to Chief Customer Experience Officer, a more strategic role, kind of working with the UK exec and a little bit globally around defining what is National Express's customer experience. What are we doing, and trying to drive that kind of thing. And that 8-year stint really was all about taking the customer from, like, one of the values was put the customers at the heart of what we do. Now, lots of companies say that that's what they do. And I'm not saying that they don't care about customers, because I obviously have customer service teams that do. But when you put the customer at the heart, what that really means is the customer becomes instinctive in your thinking. And in lots of organizations, even though they say they're customer first or customers at heart, it's not first, second, or third choice in their thinking process. It's normally an afterthought. And that's just a subconscious thing. And it's a culture piece, right? So the work at National Express was really changing the culture to bring the customer from the sidelines to more to the center, to how do we make sure we embed customer thinking in our decision making? How do we make sure it's not an afterthought? How do we make sure we've considered them in every partnership that we set up? How do we make sure that when we're designing our operational processes, we're also thinking external customers, not just internal customers, right? And then in July last year, I left the business. I had a great 8-year spell there, and decided, and I exited, took some time out, sat on a beach for a while. And then in September, my daughter went back to school. My wife has got her own business. She's busy. I'm sitting there thinking, well, what am I going to do now? And then I set up Druva Star. And so here I am. And Druva Star is my own consultancy, all focused around driving customer experience, helping organizations to be customer first in their thinking, and being able to achieve long-term sustainable success through customer excellence, because you can't really win in the long term just with an excellent product. The experience is key to the whole thing, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that. So here I am as Chief Everything Officer. Sorry, that was a long intro.
It wasn't at all. It was brilliant. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Tell me just briefly, where does the name come from, the name?
So it's got two meanings to it. So my mom's name was Tara, and Tara in Hindi is translated to star.
Okay.
So metaphorically, she's always been my guiding star, and she still is to this day. So star was an important name in there. And Dhruva is the mythological story in Hinduism of a young boy who was turned into the North Star by the gods as a reward for his faith and dedication and an unshakable faith in what he was trying to do. And the link back to the work is one of the key components around customer experience, and you will have heard me say this when you've seen my videos and what I talk about, is getting clarity and focus and understanding exactly the kind of experience that you want to deliver. A lot of companies fall foul of customer experience because they don't have their North Star. Dhruva Star is North Star, and that's where
Right.
the name comes from.
Brilliant. I love that. Thank you. Um, and you mentioned there, you will have seen in your videos, and I feel like I do want to make the point that the content that you put out, and I'm a big fan of LinkedIn, and I think LinkedIn as a tool has come a long way from the days of kind of only going on it if you're looking for a new job, but actually these days going on there because there's so much learning to get from that. For me, learning about when I came into the rail industry, it was part of my education and continues to be when I'm reading articles from people who are working in different parts of the transport industry. But without exception, whenever I see you pop up on my timeline, I sit back a bit and say, right, I'm going to watch this, I'm going to listen to it, I'm going to read it, because I know without exception I'm going to learn something. And not only am I going to learn something, but you're going to perk my day up, because how you tell a story, and you've just demonstrated that beautifully, but how you tell a story and link it into our own experience of what we might be going through when we're in customer facing roles, client facing roles, is just spot on. And you do that in a really beautiful way. So I would encourage anybody who is listening to this podcast to connect with you on LinkedIn, just to see that content when it comes through, because there's loads of learning to be done. So I wanted to put my two penneth in there before we move on to the second part. Clearly, and as I've just said, you're a fabulous storyteller, and I love how you've weaved everything together in terms of where that initial experience of what does customer experience look like. Well, we're going way back to your dad's supermarket and the people who were coming in, and you won't have even been aware, and to be honest, I don't think your dad will have been aware either, of this is how we interact with people, this is how we behave, this is how we build relationships, and therefore we have a successful business. So it's kind of, you don't start with, well, how much money can I make from these people, do you? You start with an interest in them. What do I need to have on the shelves to be able to satisfy these people who are coming in the door? So building it around the people rather than, well, here's a product and we'd like you to like it, please. So I could go off on a whole tangent with that one, wouldn't I?
Just really quickly, I mean, it probably started even before that, because my grandfather had a business in Kenya. They had a shoe store. They had two shoe stores, and my grandfather didn't really speak a lot of English. So a funny story about him was, whether you're a male or female, he'd refer to you as Madame when you came into his store, and he spoke broken English. But people used to go to his store because of how he was with people, not because he was the cheapest or the best product or whatever. There were lots of shoe stores available, but he just built a really successful business, and based on reputation of how he treated people when they came in. And so I think my dad probably picked it up from him, and all that kind of.
It's in that, and it gets passed on, doesn't it? It's about how we treat people, how we connect with people, and how we build relationships with people, and those sustainable relationships, not just something that's going to do now for that pair of shoes, but actually I want you to come back to me for every other pair of shoes as and when you're ready, and then bring your children and bring your brothers and your sisters and tell other people about it. And when I was in my banking days, I did a lot of research around customer service, because that was my job at the Royal Bank, and I can remember the statistics around doing a good job versus doing a bad job, and how many people would tell other people. And one of the things being, if it's gone wrong, because things do go wrong, if you put it right to the satisfaction of the customer, the impact of that is actually greater than having got it right in the first place, which blew my mind. You think about it now, we used to be able to tell 5 people, 10 people, 15 people. You can tell thousands of people now, but just putting a tweet out, can't you?
In an instant.
Putting it onto social media. So All of this fascinating, and it's a subject I'm really passionate about, and I always want to talk to you loads about it. We
Yeah.
could sit here for 5 hours. So I'm not going to do that because that's not what we're here for.
Yeah.
I'm going to move into the second part of the conversation in terms of what would you change? So, as we're recording this in the middle of June, we've got a general election on the horizon on the 4th of July. And I think the nation is expecting a different crowd to be in Downing Street on the 5th of July. Who knows? I think we've got experience over the past recent history that anything could happen. But if you were advising whoever pitches up and whoever's looking at the transport industry in particular in this context, what would be the three things that you would be telling them to do in order to take us from where we are now as an industry to where we need to be?
I think the first thing that I would be talking about is collaboration. I think that the way that transport is set up, there are lots of silos. If you look at rail, you've got the train operators, you've got Network Rail, you've got you've got these different parties in there, all with their own, what they're trying to achieve, their own set of KPIs, their own set of outcomes that they're looking for. And sometimes those KPIs and outcomes aren't always fully aligned in a way that delivers for the end result, which is the customer, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's that. I think also the broader collaborative piece about connectivity with the rest of the transport infrastructure. So the connectivity between rail and bus to bike. I know we have these schemes where people can hire little bikes and they can use the same pass and stuff, but I think there's more that can be done about really creating a really integrated transport system. But I think it
Yes.
starts with collaboration at the very top. That sense and that understanding that we're working collectively to deliver for the people. So how do we best set ourselves up in order to do that? And I know maybe that sounds simplistic or oversimplistic, but it's common sense. It just, just because something's common sense doesn't mean it's common practice. I think that's in its simplest sense. How can we really create the highest purpose that we're in this all to achieve this outcome we're looking for? Then how do we best align ourselves and how do we best set up a target operating model which enables us to all win individually but collectively win together for the customer?
Yes.
I think that's first and foremost. And that's a difficult thing to do because there's lots of baggage, there's lots of history there. And I don't for a minute think that someone's just going to sit at a table, get out a flip chart and go, here we go, we're going to do it. It's going to take work, but I think it starts with the will to want to do that. It starts with that collective buy-in and that vision and to go, look, this is what we're going to look to do. How do we do this together? So I think that's the first part. I think the second one, I would love to see more diversity in rail. And diversity for me isn't just the protected characteristics of race, gender, age, sexual orientation, and the usual kind of things. I think it's the diversity of thought. And look, there are some amazing people on rail. Some of them have been on your podcasts. I see them, and I'm using rail as an example, but let's just say transport broader. There's some brilliant people in transport. And what I find in transport, having come from the outside in, they've been in transport a long time. But when you've been in one place for a long time, even with the most open mind and the best will in the world, you become conditioned to the environment that you're in. And I think the diversity of thinking and thought is needed in the transport sector. People from different backgrounds, education backgrounds, different exposure to different industries. What could they bring to the table? How can they bring different thinking? Whether you do that through appointments into your board through the exec or through your structure, or whether that's done through a non-exec director, diversification, whichever way you do it, you need to bring that, that outside in thinking into your business. And I think I'd love to see that. I also would love to, and I will say this because it's dear to me, and I know, it's not about having an agenda or anything like that. It's that I just genuinely, when I look around, I'll take buses for an example. When you look at the front line of bus, you see such diversity in the driver population. But when you go up those organizations, there's less and less diversity from a race perspective in terms of who's leading those. I remember I went to a transport event in London early on in my National Express career, and it was a gathering of the great minds in transport, bus, rail, all the different modes. And I was the only person of colour in that room. and there was one other woman in there. Everybody else was a white male with white hair. And that's not a detriment to them. You know, they've obviously served the industry well. I'm just saying that as we change as a society, we need to inject more diverse thinking. And it's because it enables you to, you know, that whole thing about stepping in the customer's shoes is fine. And you can do that to an extent. But taking people that are already in those shoes and bringing them in and listening to their views and helping you to understand the world from their perspective, not to make you wrong or them right, but just to give you that additional perspective, I think it's a powerful thing for organizations to do. And then I think, you know, there's the benefits of that around it are really important. But I will say that diversity without inclusion is pointless. You have to have an inclusive culture first. So I think that's the thing. And I think the third thing, and you'd expect me to say this, more customer first thinking. I think that rail and bus and, you know, I keep saying rail, but transport obviously has people that care about customers. You have drivers that care about customers.
Absolutely,
That care about customers' contact. So it's not about the fact that they don't care about customer service and delivering service. Customer first thinking, as I said earlier, is about how do you make it instinctive in the boardroom to have a conversation about something and customer be a dominant part of that conversation. You know, Jan Carlson, who was the former CEO of SAS Airlines, often talks about when he took over the airline, they were in board meetings to talk about metal and infrastructure and planes and buildings, but no one ever talks about the customer. And actually, you know, our customers don't care about the buildings and the metal and the safety awards that we have to the degree that we do. We're really proud of it in transport, and so we should be. There's some brilliant work that takes place. But thinking like our customers, and not just the customer, but we've got a diverse range of customers, but understanding all of those different segments and bringing that customer first thinking in, research, feedback, all of those different viewpoints, and that's shaping the decision making. I think that's really critical.
I completely agree. And I think it's a really important point that you've made, that we've got thousands of people working in the transport industry who do an amazing job. And, you know, you and I have both worked in lots of different industry sectors. I'd be really interested if you share my experience on this. But coming into transport, and specifically rail, because that's where I've spent the majority of my time over the last 11 and a half years, I have never worked in an industry sector where people are as passionate about what they do. I just haven't. You know, I really genuinely, every time I'm out and about on the network, or if I'm privileged to be a judge on the National Rail Awards and I get to read the nominations for people who have made an outstanding personal contribution to the railway and to the customer. So I feel like I want to say up front, there's people doing an amazing job.
Absolutely.
An incredible job.
Absolutely.
And you've made that point yourself. The customer first thinking at board level and at strategy level is not necessarily as evident as we see it, and we need it from there because we need it to cascade all the way down. And I think we've got a few challenges with that, in terms of, this is the way we've always done it, so we'll continue to do it like this. We have got, the UK transport industry has got an amazing reputation for safety, so we want to hang on to that. So safety comes first, which it should do, but how do we do that with the customer in mind, and how do we talk about the people aspect of transport as much as we talk about the engineering aspect or the heavy metal aspect, or all of the bits and pieces of infrastructure. So I know all of that is important, but I'm definitely coming from your position where it's kind of, but can we talk about the people bit, the employee experience and the customer experience? Because you and I are both fans of the service profit link, aren't we? Where you can't have one without the other. If your people are happy, your customer will be happy. You've mentioned the word culture a few times as we've gone through this conversation. And again, we could have an hour just on that, just skimming the surface. But it definitely is a cultural thing. I think when you look at collaboration, when you look at diversity, and when you look at your customer first thinking, so all your three wishes, if you like, that you've brought to the table, culture underpins all of those, doesn't it?
Yeah, completely. I think if you get the culture right, in your organization, that's the fundamental, that's the enabler, because culture teaches people about what does good look like, what's accepted here, how should I behave. It's their kind of, I guess, their internal compass that's given to them. And when you don't have that, and when you don't have clarity about what is it like to be here, what does good look like, people make choices based upon their own value set. Now, some people have a great value set, and they'll make really brilliant decisions about, I'm from a service background, or I've always been taught you treat people like this way, and you'll do that, and that will be in line with what you want. But other people won't be, or they might not make the decisions that you expected them to make. They might be trying to do the right thing, but not go that extra mile because they've done it from their own value set, not from the value set of the organization. So having that common set of values in an organization helps people to understand this is the way that we behave. This is what we stand for. This is when people come in contact with us, if they were going to describe who we were, these are the traits that they would say: honesty, integrity, all those kind of things.
Yes.
And the culture is just that environment that enables us to act that way. The behavior that we have to hold each other to account as well is important, because again, lots of organizations have values and they talk about a culture, and people act up in that culture, but who's holding them to account to say, hang on a second, that's not how we do things here. Just a really quick story I'll share from Egg Days. You remember Mike Harris,
I do.
who was the CEO. There was a real unfortunate thing that happened in one of the boardrooms where somebody left. We had a chap called Tom Alube. I don't know if you've met Tom, and Tom has shared this story on his LinkedIn, so I'm not saying anything that he wouldn't want me to share. But somebody on flip charts had drawn a face of a monkey. Tom's a black guy, drawn a face of a monkey and written his name or something underneath it. And Mike just sent an open letter to the entire organization saying, I don't know who did this, and I don't know who you are, but this is not what we accept here. This is not who we are. So I suggest that you think about whether this is the place that you want to work, or words to that effect.
Yes, yeah.
But it was setting out a signal to the entire organization. This was not acceptable.
Yeah.
This is not the behavior that we have. But even much more at a granular level, our behavior of our team managers in the, back at Egg, or the behavior of our leaders, it was all about role modeling what we expect from others. And behaving in that kind of way. And that's how you drive the culture, because the culture is driven by not what people say, it's about what people do. It's driven by the behavior and the way that people present themselves in the organization.
Completely agree. And I think that the role modeling, absolutely, show me, and then I'll learn. But also with that example you've just shared, being very, very willing to call it out. Because there are definitely situations that we will both be able to think of, and everyone listening to this will be able to think of, where we've seen something or we've heard something, and then there's a kind of momentary, that's not right, but I don't know what to do about it. And if I actually challenge it, will I make it worse? What's the right thing to do in this situation? And what Mike did in that situation is to make it abundantly clear that this isn't acceptable. I'm telling you it's not acceptable. I've seen it, and I'm suggesting that you need to consider whether this is the place for you. So calling it out is as important, isn't it? It's that kind of ability to be able to say, no, this doesn't fit. This doesn't fit with who we are as an organization and who we are as individuals.
And it also gave everyone else permission to call it out, because he'd done it. Everyone was like, well, actually, that's what good looks like. That's how we call it out. When I was at NX, we had one of the things around trying to drive a more customer focused culture. I implemented Workplace by Facebook, which was the kind of internal version of Workplace, and the team didn't quite understand what I was trying to do. So this was one of those seek forgiveness rather than permission moments.
Right. Yeah.
So I implemented it anyway. And it was a way of the different coach stations across the country and the different teams who didn't really come into contact with each other that regularly, sharing stories about great customer episodes, whether it was a heroic act or whether it was, just recognizing a colleague for doing something. But they started to post this on this platform and share it with one another, and people started to like each other's posts and comment on it, and it started to help people to understand what was good look like. But the big change came when the exec started to go on there and start to comment and validate for other
Oh,
people
well, yeah,
what does good look like. Because as soon as Chris Hardy or Tom Stables or somebody else in the team put like, I really like this, or well done, it told
yeah,
other people this is what good looks like here. So it gave
yes,
them permission to step forward and do more of that. And I don't
yeah,
know whether the team actually fully ever understood that, the leadership team, but that's the
mm,
power that it had.
yeah,
I remember early in my career when I was at McDonald's, and I shared this story recently on LinkedIn. Um, in the training, you remember the good old days when people used to pay with cash? You used to have a little ultraviolet light that you'd put the cash
oh
in.
yeah, check your notes, yeah, yeah,
In training, you'd done it at transactional so many times. You check, and it's a real transactional thing. You just do it. And I remember the first time I did it, and the light lit up. It was a fake note, and I was like, oh, I don't know what to do here. And then the manager
right,
came running over and we explained to the customer it's a fake note. And afterwards, he took me to one side and I just thought, oh, it's just a thing that you do learn in training. And he just said to me, well done, really well done for checking that. You've stopped somebody using a fake note. That's really good. And whilst it feels like a tiny thing, what it did for me, it validated the value of that specific process. So I
yeah,
always made sure there afterwards, I wasn't just transactionally going, oh, I'm going to check a note. I understood the importance of it. So
yes,
those moments of validation are really, really important. We sometimes think just recognizing something is just recognizing it or giving somebody a certificate, but it's teaching them something. It's showing them this is what good looks like. So
yeah,
it's a really important part of your culture. Sorry, we went off on
yeah.
a.
It's massive. No, you see, there's so much, and I'm struggling because I'm like, I'm aware of the time and aware that we need to bring the conversation to its conclusion. But there's so much more I want to ask you about. Anyway, the final part of the conversation is I am always really curious about people's energy and how they keep so positive. And you, over the many, many years I've known you, we've never had a conversation where you haven't inspired me and energized me. But I am going to hazard a guess and say you don't wake up like that every day. There might be like one day every 10 years where Vinay wakes up and it's kind of like, yeah, do you know, I'm not really feeling it. Where
No.
do you go for your inspiration? What perks you back up again?
I like my family is, I know maybe it sounds cliche or whatever, but my family is just like the most important to me. I have a
Yeah.
beautiful 13-year-old daughter, a wonderful wife of almost 25 years now. I have a family that keeps me grounded, that I just look around and I'm surrounded by love, just
Mm.
unconditional love. And that for me is the most important thing. So on those days where I wake up and go, I've got nothing, go down to the kitchen, make a cup of coffee, and Jem stood there and we'll just look at each other and then we'll go for a walk. And then while we're on that walk, something will perk up in my head and I'll record a video or I'll see something or whatever. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think my family first and foremost. I try, I read a lot, I listen to a lot of podcasts. So I read lots of, we've already talked about Tony Robbins, Zig Ziglar, Les
Yeah.
Brown. I listen to Stephen Bartlett. I listen to the High Performance Podcast. I listen to The Rest Is Politics with Rory and
Oh, I
Alistair
love that.
Campbell.
Yeah.
I love that. It's great. So I try to expose myself to listening to different things. Even my music taste is eclectic, from gangster rap, hip hop, right through to Pavarotti or classical
Wow.
music. Like it's just a
Yeah.
range of stuff. So depending on where I am, but I know about myself, the thing that energizes me most, excuse me, is being around other people. I get my
Yeah.
energy from being around other people, which is probably a lot of the reason why I love public speaking, because when I'm in front of an audience, I draw my energy from being around other people.
Yeah.
So I found lockdown quite hard, and working on
Yes.
my own. I still
Yeah.
find it hard now, in these four walls, sometimes it drives me mad. So I need to get out and go for a walk. So
Yeah.
that's what inspires me. Um, Family, reading, exposing myself to stuff. And I think just this mentality, I think the quote is in Ted Lasso actually, be curious, not judgmental. So and before that, the Benjamin Zander's book about the art of possibility just instilled in me this thing about curiosity and possibility.
Yeah.
Whenever I'm out and about, I'm always observing. There's never nothing going on. There's always something happening. And in
Yeah.
those moments, as things unfold, you find metaphors, stories, ideas that can help you to take information and get it across to people in a way that lands with them.
Mm.
That's the skill of it,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
for me, that's the key thing. I try and keep fit. I'm not as in good shape as I was, but I built a gym in the house during lockdown that probably doesn't get
Yeah.
used as much as it should do, but I did that. I was part of a 5 a.m. club for a while, so I used to get up for religiously for I think 7 years. I got up at 5 a.m. every single
Right.
day and
Wow.
trained in the morning and stuff. So that was when I was at my fittest. But yeah, I think those things are the things that inspire me. And I think, as I said
Yeah.
earlier, my mom, even though she's not here physically, I just feel like she's around me all the time. I just get this. I can't explain it. It's a guidance, or it's a people talk about a guardian angel or those kind of
Yeah.
things. You believe in life. The scientists on the call might be thinking, God, what's he talking about? But you believe what you believe.
Yeah.
And I just think there's a force greater than us out there that guides
Yes.
us.
I completely agree. I have a sign up which I actually bought. It was as a part of a Christmas decoration display in a shop many years ago, and
Mm,
it's just a wooden sign with a wire hook on it, and it just says "Believe." And
yeah,
the idea is that it's kind of we believe in Santa. Is that
yeah,
it was the gist of it, but
yeah,
that is in my porch in my house, and every time I come in the door, that's what I see because it's
yeah,
up all year round. It's not just for Christmas. It's
yeah,
all year.
yeah,
It's having that belief, having the belief in something, whatever that is. I think that's
yeah.
absolutely critical.
And I think there's probably two of the things that just really quickly like to share before we wrap up.
Mm,
Um, Two quotes that kind of really stand out for me in my life. There's a Maya Angelou quote, which is people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you do, but they'll never forget how you feel,
yeah,
how they
I
make you
love
feel.
that. Yeah,
Um, and for me, that's always been a key truth is that when you speak to people, particularly if you go to funerals and you hear people give a eulogy, they don't talk about the person's bank account, the car they drove, the house they lived in. They talk about how
yeah,
they make them feel. They talk about the connection that they had with them. And I think, in life, it's true. When you talk to people about others, they'll often talk about how they felt in their presence. And for me, there's a really important thing that I kind of try and hold true. And my intent in any conversation is how can I leave this person feeling better than when they first came into the conversation with me? I
yeah,
want them to leave this conversation feeling better. How
yeah,
can I do that? What can I do here to do that? And I think then the second thing, and this is about self-awareness, is you cannot see the whole picture when you're inside of the frame.
no,
And you have to be able to step out, look back, or have a mechanism that people can give you that awareness. And that for me is the importance of feedback.
mm,
And I'm always somebody who's valued feedback, both at a personal level, at a business level. When you can take feedback, when you can listen in and really lean in, even when people are telling you something you don't want to hear, but when you can lean in and
mm,
go, what's the intent here? What is it that they're seeing?
yeah,
You still have a choice whether you take it on board or not. But embracing it as a gift that could give you a unique perspective is
yeah,
really important. So
yeah.
yeah, those are two of the things that kind of sit in that whole inspiration, what makes me tick box.
Yeah. And I think that is both of those are a perfect way to bring the conversation to a close. And we never, over the 50 odd episodes that we've done now over the last 4 years, none of them are scripted. We kind of say, well, it's career story, it's things you'd like to change, it's your inspiration. So we know what the gist is, but there's never a script. But if there was, then that what you've shared with us just then in terms of coming into a conversation and thinking about how you want to lead the other person, my feedback to you is that you have re-energized me again. You've ignited some curiosity in my head again, and you've made me smile, which you always do. So I'm hugely grateful to you for coming on the podcast,
Oh,
for
bless you.
sharing a tiny amount of the wisdom and the experience and the knowledge that you have. And I would absolutely encourage people to connect with you on LinkedIn, Vinay Palmer. Obviously, your name will be on the title of the podcast, so people can check the spelling.
Yeah.
Absolutely encourage people to connect with you and get a daily dose of this content that we've had today. So my huge thanks. We will be in touch very shortly, but I'm looking forward to sharing this conversation with our audience. Thank
Oh,
you.
thank you too. Thank you.
My huge thanks to Vinay for such an interesting and inspiring conversation. There's so much more that we could have talked about, but hopefully that's given you a flavour. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please do come and join us next time on the Intuitive Insights podcast. Thank you for joining us.